Hey, it's Ryan from upfitsupply.com, and in this video, we're gonna tell you everything that you need to know before buying Legend liners for your cargo van. Let's get into it. Now, when we talk about Legend liners, what we're really talking about are these guys. This is a DuraTherm wall panel. This is actually just a sample cut of the material. These are liners that go on the inside of the van that protect all the exposed sheet metal in the back of the van. So if you think about it, when you buy a new cargo van, you get the van and in the back, it's all open. So up front, you've got your seats, you've got a floor up there, you've got your doors, you've got your headliner, all that. It's like a finished vehicle up front, and in the back, it's completely bare. It's just that sheet metal. And so what Legend Fleet, the manufacturer, has done is they've created these wall panels, these wall liners, these ceiling liners that cover all that exposed material in the back. And what it does is it acts like an armor plate. It protects that sheet metal, because if you think about it, all the sheet metal back there is essentially the exterior sheet metal of the van. And so if you load in your supplies, your equipment, your tools, whatever, and things shift in transit, you're not too careful about putting things back, and you accidentally dent the interior, you're really denting the exterior body of the van. And next thing you know, you got paint chipping, you've got rust coming and all of that. And so they developed these panels to protect the sheet metal. That's what these panels are for. They're the armor plates. They take the beating so that your sheet metal body does not take the beating. And so what are liners? You just have a little sample here. This is they call it a dual polypropylene sheet mated to a central fluted core, which is just a fancy way of saying 2 layers of plastic glued to a core. And so we have a layer of plastic on one side, you got a layer of plastic on the other side, and in the middle, you almost have like, think corrugated cardboard where you have that wavy stuff in the middle. It's kind of like that, but completely different. It's little bubbles, tiny little bubbles in between these 2 layers here that gives it a lot of strength, a lot of rigidity. It can take the beating and not break or tear away. So it's a super strong plastic material. Now the DuraTherm liner from Legend also has a layer of insulation on the back. So here you can see without the insulation, they have this insulation back here. It's got foil, it's got some foam, and basically what Legend did was, hey, we're covering all of this exposed sheet metal in the back of the van. Why don't we add some insulation behind that to help control temperatures and keep road noise down? Because with it all exposed back there, there's no insulation. And so you're running the air conditioning on full blast and it never really cools down the van. You're running the heat on full blast, it never warms up the van. It's super loud back there from the road noise, especially on the highway and all of that. And so they apply this layer of insulation behind the liner to cut down on that road noise and control temperatures in the back of the van. Now, while we're on the topic of insulation, we get questions all the time. What's the R value of the liner, of the insulation and all of that? And it's really unique what happens with these panels when you install them. So just on its own, if you take the plastic, you got the 2 layers of plastic, you got the little core there, you got your foam, and you got your foil layer, just that has an R value of 4.5 or 4.5. So pretty good insulation benefit just from this little thin piece of material here. Now, when you actually install these on the wall, you actually create an air gap between the exterior sheet metal and the liner right here in the middle. And that also has insulation benefit of an R value of about 3. So you combine that all together and you're looking at like 7.5 roughly R value just from these liners. And then you're still gonna have that gap there. You could stick additional insulation in there as well to even further insulate your van. So a lot of insulation benefit just caused from the whole science of the panel being mounted on the interior of the van, and then also having the foil and the foam and the 2 layers of plastic and all that. Ton of insulation benefit that you get from these liners. Now let's also just talk about Legend Fleet for a second. Legend Fleet Solutions, I think they just call themselves Legend now. They are a manufacturer, they are a brand. They actually started in the UK, over in England. And if you think about vans in Europe, they're like 10 years ahead of what we see here in North America. They've had the Euro style vans for a long time over in Europe. They've been using them for work for a long time over in Europe. And then in 2014 is really when that movement took hold here in the United States, where you start seeing the ProMaster and the Transit, these Euro style tall vans that you could create workspaces inside of. And so Legend Fleet was really born in that whole mindset of the van, work van market. And then I believe it was in 2004, they moved to North America and set up shop in Ontario, Canada. And they also have a facility in Minnesota. but they've really become more of a North American company. And they got their start really by creating flooring for like farms and barns and stuff like that. And then one day they got a call from a large fleet in the area who wanted them to make a floor for their vans. And then that eventually turned into an opportunity to make a new product line. And then they just slowly have expanded their product offering since then. So how are these panels installed on the inside of the vehicle? Well, it's really simple. Number one, it depends on the design of the particular van. So what Legend tries to do is some of these vans have existing holes on the ribbing or on the cross members or on the door frames or whatever, that they can use a little plastic push and clip like this to secure the liner to. And so what they do is they take the liner, they have the hole pre-cut in the liner match up with that hole in the body of the van, and then you just use a push and clip to secure the liner to the side of the van. You can push it in by hand and then take a little rubber mallet and pound it in there a little bit more. That's what they try to do whenever they can. Now there's a lot of circumstances where those holes just don't exist. For example, in the GM vans like the Savannah and the Express, there's none of those holes on the walls or the doors of the van, so they have to use another method for attaching those liners, and that is the self-threading screw, which looks like this. It's just a special screw that has a little tip on it that drills a little hole first and then threads onto that hole. And on the other side of the screw, there's a little spacer or collar up here that basically stops the screw from going any further into the sheet metal, and it creates a nice little crimp on the liner itself, and that's what holds it up against the wall. Now, it really depends on how the vehicle is designed. If it's got the push-in locations where you can use the push-in clips, Legend will do that. In fact, I think on pretty much all the ceiling liners, they are able to use existing holes. They're able to use clips like this. So you've got a gray clip for your gray liners and white clips for your white liners, and then same thing with your screws. You're gonna have a gray screw for your gray liners and you have a white head screw for your white liners. So now the liners are going to have pre-drilled locations right here. This happens to be a rear window liner for a GMC Savannah. You can see right here, they have pre-drilled holes. These are gonna be for the self-threading screws because in the Savannah, the walls and the doors have to be attached with self-threading screws because there are no existing holes in the body of the van that they can use. And so they're gonna be pre-drilled, and so these are gonna be safe locations on where you can put those screws into the van. Same thing with the pushing clips. They're gonna be a little bit bigger holes than this, and they're gonna line up with those holes that already exist in the ribbing of the van. Now the question of if they're gonna be pushing clips or self-threading screws is completely up to how the van is designed. If there's no holes that can accommodate one of these pushing clips, they're gonna use a self-threading screw. And so there's some applications that are able to just use this push and clip. Then there's others that just use the self-threading screw, and then there's applications that use both. For example, the ProMaster, on the walls, you can use a push and clip, I believe on all the lower part of the panel, and then you have to use a self-threading screw for the top of the panel. Now, another nuance of installing these liners is they are precision cut to fit the particular van, but the manufacturers of the van offer a lot of different versions of the vans with a lot of different options. Some have sliding doors, some have 2 sliding doors, some only have 1, some have hinge doors. Just a lot of different options that there are for these vans. And so what Legend has to do to accommodate all these different options is sometimes they'll give you a liner that's a little bit bigger than what your particular van needs, because maybe you've got some foam blocks towards the front of the cab, or you've got 2 sliding doors or something like that. And so in order to accommodate that, because there are those minor differences, they will score the back of the liner. You kind of see an example of that right here where they've done some scoring right here. This is actually for a fold. But on a ceiling liner, they will score it so that you can cut it with a razor blade. So it's basically the liner's halfway cut through. So if you don't need to remove that portion, it stays in place. But if you do, you can easily trace that with a sharp razor blade and cut that little piece off. So that does happen on quite a few ceiling liners, specifically around foam blocks. So if you have foam blocks like up towards the cab on the top side of the van, usually they're gonna have a cut in the ceiling liner to go around those, or you can just take those foam blocks out, whatever you wanna do, it's up to you, but they do accommodate for those. The other thing is going to be factory ceiling lights. So if your van is offered with lighting from the factory. So this is gonna be like, I believe the Transit is this way, the GM vans are this way, I think the Sprinter might be this way. There is kind of a rear factory lighting option for the cargo area. They're gonna come pre-trimmed, scored, so that you can retain the use of those factory lights. Now, you can also just leave those in if you don't want to use the factory lights, or you don't have them, or you want to add aftermarket lights. You have that option as well. Legend actually makes a pretty cool motion sensor ceiling light that makes installation super simple. It's all plug and play harnesses, and you can mount those ceiling lights on their ceiling liners, which is pretty cool. Now, another thing that we need to talk about is how these are purchased. So Legend sells these as a wall kit, a door kit, and a ceiling kit, and they're all three separate. There's no just one liner kit that gives you everything to cover every surface of the back of the van. It's sold separately as walls, doors, and ceilings. And so your wall liners cover basically all the fixed walls on the sides of the van. So it's gonna fit basically all the way along the driver's side. It's gonna fit right behind that sliding door, that side door, all the way to the back. It does not cover the door areas. So the wall liners are just gonna be for the fixed walls in the van. The door liners, pretty simple. They're just gonna cover the side and rear doors. Then your ceiling liner, again, simple. It's going to cover the entire ceiling. Now, one nuance about the ceiling is that you can purchase it with and without ceiling sills. And ceiling sills are aluminum strips of metal. They're a diamond plate pattern that will create a transition between your ceiling and your wall liner. If you don't install sills, you're gonna have this gap in between your ceiling liner and your wall liner. You know, on the ProMaster, it's a pretty big gap because there's a big little nook and cranny back there that's gonna be fully exposed if you don't cover that with a ceiling sill. So it's just a matter of preference on if you want those or not. On some applications like the GM vans, I think that the ceiling sills kind of play a structural support role with the liners, because the way that the ceiling is designed in the Savannah Express is it kind of curves down, and you have to put some bends in the liner, and there's nowhere to attach some of those bends. And so after a while, they can kind of droop down from just being on the road and all that. If you have the ceiling sills installed, it holds them in place. So in my mind, on the GM vans, it kind of plays a structural role. The other thing about the ceilings is if you have a longer van, like a longer wheelbase, which is gonna be most of the full-size vans, sometimes your ceiling liner is actually gonna be two pieces. You're gonna have a longer piece up towards the front, and then a separate panel that's gonna be towards the rear. And Legend will provide you what's called a joiner strip, which is just a little plastic piece of trim that you can slide the front liner into and the rear liner into. It connects them together, gives you a nice seamless transition. But that's just one thing to take note of on those longer vans, is sometimes you do have to join the ceiling together with a joiner strip. Now, the door liners can also be a little bit confusing in terms of what you get. So if your van comes from the factory with a door panel, so I'm talking about a panel that looks like it's almost like it was a passenger van and it had paneling on the bottom of the door and you had glass up above. If you have that kind of OEM paneling on the lower part of the door, most of the time that is not going to be covered by the door liner. So in particular, this is going to be the rear doors on the Ford Transit. It's going to be the rear and side doors on the GM vans. It's going to be the rear doors on the Nissan NV. Now, the ProMaster and the Sprinter are completely covered, both the side doors and the rear doors. Now, one thing about the Transit and the Sprinter is the side doors, actually two different panels. There's gonna be an upper panel and a lower panel. And then on the Nissan NV, I think technically is one panel, but it almost looks like two panels. ProMaster is one panel across the entire side sliding door. Now, another thing you want to consider on the door liners is if you have glass on the rear doors and on the side doors. So if you have like a GM van, remember it's got the factory paneling on the lower part, the liners actually install where the glass would be. And so if you have glass in the rear and side on the GM van, you're basically gonna be covering that up with a liner. You're not gonna get the benefit of the rear glass for backing up and things like that. And you're gonna see, this insulation through the window and all that. So in some cases, I actually recommend not getting the door liners if you have glass. Like I mentioned on the Ford Transit, the lower part of the Ford Transit have OEM paneling. The liners do not cover that part, just covers where that glass would be. And so the rear windows, if you have that in the Transit, you have to consider, do you want the panel for the side door? Because you can't buy that separately. So we're about to do a Ford Transit Upfit here, and it's got glass in the back, but on the side, we're still getting the door liners because we want that side door covered, and we're just not gonna use the panels for the rear doors. Now, just a couple of things about those ceiling sills. One, if you have a longer van, sometimes those ceiling sills are gonna be multiple pieces that you'll combine with one or more joiner strips. So you're gonna have a long piece of aluminum, another long piece of aluminum, and there's a joiner strip that you use 4 screws to attach the two together. And like on the ProMaster, I think there's 3 that you attach together on the 159-inch wheelbase. So you're gonna do 2 different sets of joiner strips. There's also some pieces that you may or may not use depending on your door type. So if you've got a sliding door versus a hinge door on the GM vans, there is a piece that you won't use over the door if you have a sliding door. And that's gonna be the same for some of the other vehicles as well. Again, if you have the foam blocks up towards the front, sometimes there are pieces that you won't use on the sills for those as well. Now the installation of the ceiling sills, for the most part, the ceiling sill is actually attached to the liner themselves. So you're using some self-threading screws to go into the liner themselves in the ceiling and the wall. Now occasionally, like when you're going over a door or there's some other location, occasionally it will go into the actual sheet metal of the van, but for the most part, those ceiling sills actually attach to the liner themselves and not to the sheet metal. Now in terms of popularity, if people are just buying one liner kit between wall, door, and ceilings, most of the time it's gonna be the wall liners because that's gonna give you the greatest protection. That's where you're loading things in and all of that. The ceiling liner is just additional protection. The ceiling liner, you do get the maximum benefit from an insulation perspective because just the science of how that works. So you get the most benefit from having that ceiling liner from an insulation perspective. But in terms of people just purchasing one or the other, wall liner seems to be the most popular, but usually most of our customers buy the walls, the ceilings, and the doors together for a full liner package. Now, when you are doing a full liner package, one thing to consider in your installation is there is an order that you need to install everything. You're gonna start with your walls, then you're gonna do your ceilings, and then your ceiling sills, and then your door liners. The door liners don't really matter what order that you do them in, but you do want your walls in first, and then the ceiling sills. Now, if you are doing a full protection package in the back of the van, meaning you're going to be doing floors and wheel well covers and wall liners and ceiling liners and door liners, there is also an order that you want to do that as well. You want to start with your wheel well covers, get those covered first, then put your floor in, then do your wall liners, then your ceiling liners, then your ceiling sills, and then your door liners. Now, one of the most important things to take into consideration when you are purchasing liners is the specs of your van. So the manufacturers of these vans make them in a lot of different sizes. So the Ford is offered in 3 lengths and 3 roof heights. The Sprinter is offered in 3 lengths and 2 roof heights. The ProMaster is offered in 4 lengths and 3 roof heights. So you need to know what your wheelbase is, your body length is, and your roof height is. So those longer full-size vans like the Ford Transit with the 148-inch wheelbase, the Sprinter with 170, and the ProMaster with 159-inch wheelbase, there's actually 2 different body lengths of those longer wheelbase vans. Usually it's called the regular and the extended, and basically it's a little bit more overhang off of that rear axle. So if you've got the extended, you get a little bit more length beyond that rear axle. And so you wanna make sure that you know all those specs. You wanna know your wheelbase. If you've got one of those longer ones, you wanna know if you have the regular body length or the extended body length, and then you're gonna wanna know your roof height. Is it a low, is it a mid roof or medium, or a high roof? Is it a standard roof or a high roof? Is it a standard roof or a high roof or a super high roof? So make sure you know all those specs before you order, because these liners cover your everything and they're precision cut for a specific wheelbase, specific roof height. And the other thing is they're giant, and so they ship to you on a pallet, and shipping costs a lot. And then if you get the wrong things, you got to send them back and then get another set. You know, you're talking about 3 rounds of shipping. That's just going to eat you alive. So make sure that you get those specs correct. I found like 50% of the time the dealership doesn't really even know the specs on your van. So just make sure that you confirm that. Take the measurement yourself between your rear axle and your front axle. Take some measurements yourself on the roof height and all that to figure out which van you have. Now, the DuraTherm liners are offered in 2 different color options. The most popular by far is going to be this gray color. You can see here, this is just a big sample. It's a lighter gray. It's not super dark. It's still not going to darken the van too much, but it does have a textured layer to it. The gray does. And so what this does is, you know, it doesn't show scuffs as much, doesn't get as dirty as much and all of that. So that helps a little bit. I think it adds a little bit of durability maybe, but this by far is the most popular color. And they also offer it in white. The thing about white is it's flat. There's no texturing on here. You know, if I hold this up to one of our studio lights here, I can kind of see on the edges some of the bubbling or the fluting in the center core. But it is a nice bright white color. If you want to brighten up the back of a dark work van, this is the way to go. It does show, you know, like anything white, it shows stains and dirt and some of that a little bit. easier than your gray liners will. The other thing to think about when ordering these is, again, they are massive liners. They cover the entire wall of the cargo area of the van or the ceiling. And so they have to ship in giant boxes on a pallet. And so that means LTL Freight. And LTL Freight is a little less predictable than like your standard UPS and FedEx and all of that. And so it takes a little bit longer, it's a little bit more expensive, and there's just some weird things about it. Like they need your phone number because they're gonna call you to schedule a final delivery. When you go to track it online, they're gonna show you an estimated arrival date, but what they're really showing you is the date it arrives to their final terminal, not to you. And so usually what happens is the delivery terminal is going to get notified that your shipment is on the way, so they're gonna call you based on the phone number that you provide. And they're gonna say, hey, it looks like tomorrow we're getting your shipment. Can we schedule a delivery for the following day? And so they'll try and give you a time range on when they want that delivered. So just make sure if you're not at your business very often, business location, that you can figure that all out ahead of time so that you can make sure that you get a safe delivery of the product. The other, again, complicated thing about LTL shipping is they do call you to schedule that final delivery about 80% of the time. But if you say, hey, can you actually deliver it to another address? They're gonna be like, well, we gotta get approval. So they're gonna call our shipping warehouse and try to get that approved. But they're gonna charge you what's called a reconsignment fee, which is basically double the shipping charge. So just try to figure all that out ahead of time so you're not caught with any of these surprising fees. Another thing about LTL shipping is just the transit timing can be all over the place. Even if something ships from our Kansas City warehouse to you in Kansas City, it can take multiple days. It just seems like they seem to have more issues with driver shortages, backlogs, all those kinds of things. So just have a little bit more patience with that LTL Freight shipping. Again, like I mentioned, a lot of times you can go and track your shipment online, but they're gonna give you an estimated delivery date. And a lot of times that's not the date it's gonna get to you. It's gonna be the date that it arrives at the destination terminal. So I wanna answer some of the common questions that we get all the time about these liners. Number one is, what about warranty? Great thing is about Legend provides a lifetime warranty on the DuraTherm liners. So you're gonna be protected from manufacturing defects, anything like that. If you somehow get a bad batch, you're gonna be taken care of under that lifetime warranty. So great warranty on these products from Legend. Can you install shelving and other equipment over top the liners? Absolutely, 100%. Most of these liners are going into work vans. They're going into vans. They're gonna have shelving in them, other equipment, things like that. So 100% you can put your shelving and other equipment over top of the liners. It does add a little bit of complexity because once you get the wall liners up, you don't have visibility of all the ribs in the vans and things like that. So you do need to do a little bit of planning up ahead of time, but you certainly can install your shelving and other equipment over top the liners. Will they interfere with my lights? I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the ceiling liners. If your van has an option for factory lighting in the back, the ceiling liners are going to be pre-scored in those locations so you can retain use of those factory lights. If you don't have factory lights, you're gonna leave those locations in on the liner. The scoring is like a half cut. So one side of the plastic, they're gonna cut through the back side of the plastic to give you a little tracing line to use with your razor blade to cut out those locations. If you don't have factory lights, don't worry about it, leave it in place, or you're doing aftermarket lights, again, you can put those in later. So if your van comes from the factory with lighting in the cargo area, your ceiling liners are going to have that pre-scoring on them so you can retain use of those lights. Will it interfere with my partition? Short answer is no, you're still gonna be able to get your partition in there. However, sometimes there may be some minor trimming that you're gonna have to do up there towards the headliner or up there towards the mounting location of the partition in order to get the partition mounted. It is 100% compatible with every partition. You just may need to do some minor trimming up there towards the headliner. Now, there are some vans where the ceiling and the mounting locations for the partitions are nowhere near each other. I'm thinking of like the ProMaster, where the mounting locations for your bulkhead and where the ceiling liner lines up, they don't interfere with each other. In some instances, it's not a problem at all, but others you may need to do some minor trimming around those partition mounting locations. Can I fit additional insulation behind my liners? So the way that these liners are installed is you have got your exterior sheet metal here, you're gonna have like ribs or pillars in the van or cross members, rails, whatever, and the liners are gonna mount to those locations. So there's usually a gap. There's gonna be these cavities that are left between the exterior sheet metal and where your liner is. Of course, you can put insulation in any of those nooks and crannies. You can fit them in the bigger crannies, you can stuff it into the little areas like in the corners and all that. Of course, you can fit insulation behind those. The only instance where you may have some compatibility issues is if you're putting insulation over like the ribbing in the van, then it could interfere with the mounting locations of where you're gonna put these liners. So just take that into consideration. Of course, you can put it in those cavities, but if you're gonna be putting it over top of the pillars, the cross rails, whatever that is in the van, you're gonna have some interference with where you attach these liners to the van. When should I install the liners during my upfit? So the liners are going to be like the first thing that you put in, just like your floor. Everything's gonna go on top of your floor, so you need that in first. Everything's gonna attach to the wall, you need the liners in first. Now, if you are doing insulation, you know, in the nooks and crannies and all that, obviously you gotta put that in first, then cover it with your liners, and then attach all your accessories beyond that. So they're gonna be one of the first things that you put in, even before your partition, before any other equipment that you're gonna be putting in the van. You're gonna wanna get your liners in place. Now, I mentioned earlier, there is an order that you need to install your liners in. So if you are installing a wheel well covers, floor, liners, there is a particular order. First, if you're doing the wheel well covers, you gotta get those in first because they've got lips on them, the floor sits on top of, and then the liner overlaps on. So you gotta get your wheel well covers in first, then your floor, then your wall liners, then your ceiling liners, then your ceiling sills. The door liners, it doesn't really matter what order you put those in because there isn't any interference with installing those. Can you cut the liners? So I'm assuming cut the liners to accommodate various, you know, equipment or things you want to put in the van. Of course, you know, this is a sample here I cut out of a 4x8 sheet of DuraTherm product. So, you know, I got a nice cut here. I like to use a sharp razor blade like this. And in fact, when I'm doing this, I take the razor blade off here and I put a fresh one on because that's gonna give you the best cut. And essentially what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna only wanna cut like the first layer. So if you try and hack away at this with a box cutter or a razor blade or saw or something like that, it's gonna be really challenging. What I like to do is just focus on cutting this first top layer, and then you kind of bend it apart and you can see that score line that you created. Then you come back through again and you get through the rest of that really easily. So if you just do that nice score, you get a nice straight line, you get a nice 90-degree cut here with a razor blade. Super simple to cut through with a box cutter. Now there also are some situations, like I mentioned, there's gonna be scoring on the back of the liner, like if you got foam blocks or a weird sliding door or something like that, where it's gonna kind of be cut halfway through already. And then you're just gonna do the same thing with your sharp razor blade, cut along that line, and you get a nice, clean cut. Now, if you're doing something funky, like you're putting in curves or, you know, a weird kind of shape, you know, I would try using like a jigsaw with a fine-tooth blade on there or something like that. It's a little bit easier to get your curves and things like that using a tool like that. The only problem is that sometimes just from the friction of the saw, it can kind of like melt the corners where you're making the cut. And so you gotta kind of clean those up a little bit as well. So yes, you can modify it. My first recommendation is to use a razor blade, especially if you're doing a straight cut like this. Then if you need to do some fancy curves and stuff like that, maybe look at using a jigsaw with a sharper fine-tooth blade. Can you wash the liners? 100%. It's polypropylene, it's a plastic product. It's not gonna absorb water. It's not gonna be a breeding ground for mold and mildew. You're not gonna damage it by getting it wet. So the simplest way to clean it is just to use some water and a cloth, wipe it down, and it's gonna look brand new. What size pallet do these ship on? So this is gonna vary a little bit on what you order. So if you're getting like a floor, sometimes those ship in a little bit larger boxes than the liners do. Now it seems like the most common pallet size is gonna be about that 5x7 foot pallet. So it's a little bit larger because it needs to accommodate those larger boxes. So I would expect a larger than typical pallet size when ordering these products. Can I get the liners in a different color? As of right now, the liners are only offered in that textured gray color and the white color. There are no other color options. Sorry, that's just the only colors that they make it in. Again, that gray color is gonna be the most popular. White is also widely used, but gray by far is the most popular color. Do the ceiling sills come in any other color? Again, the ceiling sills are just that raw aluminum color. If you wanted to get them powder coated or painted or something like that, I'm sure you could do that on your own, but they are not offered in any other color. There's no other material options. It's just that aluminum diamond plate pattern. Again, highly recommended if you want that nice, smooth, finished look between your wall liner and your ceiling liner. So I highly recommend getting them. If you want to get them powder coated or do something funky with them, you could do that on your own, but no, you can't order them in additional colors from the factory. Can I get extra hardware? So one thing I will say about the hardware is that you usually get more than you need. In every install I've done of these liners, I've had more hardware than I need, and I've got a bunch of extra hardware laying around that I didn't need from the installation process. Especially if you're leaving a liner out, like if you're doing door liners, but you're not putting them on the rear doors because you got glass back there or something like that, you're gonna have a lot left over, but usually you get more than you need. We actually sell some replacement DuraTherm packs on our website. It's like you get 20 different fasteners. You can order it in the color of your liners and all that, and you can order that at upfitsupply.com. But usually I find you get more hardware than you actually need for the installation. So I would just plan on that. Why is the shipping so high? So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. These ship in massive boxes. They're huge. They're like 5 foot by 7 foot boxes, really big. You can't ship something that big via UPS, FedEx. And even if you could, it would also be super expensive. And so because it's so big, because it's covering such a large area in your van, it has to ship in these large boxes on a pallet, LTL Freight. LTL Freight is just ridiculously high. It's super expensive. You can ship something 20 miles and it'll be like 300 bucks. So what we do at Upfit Supply is we actually have a flat rate shipping on all of our liners. We really give you competitive LTL rates that you're really not gonna find anywhere else. We just absorb a lot of that cost for you because we know it's high and we wanna get this product to you for the lowest cost possible. So yes, it is high. It's higher than what you're gonna pay for a lot of other things, but unfortunately that's just kind of the devil in the details of ordering something this large. It doesn't have to ship on a pallet and those rates are just crazy high. How soon can I get them? Well, if you order them from upfitsupply.com and they are in stock, they will ship within 1 business day. A lot of times it goes out the same business day if you order like earlier in the morning, but it does ship within 1 business day. Now, once it's in the hands of the LTL Freight company, that's where it's a little bit trickier to give you a timeline. I'd say plan on 5 to 7 days in transit, LTL, 5 to 7 business days in transit. Sometimes they can be quicker, sometimes it's right at that 5 to 7 day mark, but it does take a little bit longer in transit just because the way those networks work, LTL Freight companies and so on, there's so many different carriers, so many different methods and cross docks and all that stuff you have to worry about. When you're shipping via LTL Freight. If you need a lift gate, sometimes you gotta wait for the truck to come in that has a lift gate on it, and all that kind of stuff just adds delays. So I would plan on 5 to 7 days after it leaves the shipping warehouse. Now, if it's not in stock, that can vary because if it's not in stock, we can still get it for you, but we have to order it from the factory. And a lot of times it's cut to order. So they just have these giant sheets of DuraTherm laying around, and when they get the order for your dual door Ford Transit or some kind of oddball application like that, they actually have to get the sheets out, they have to cut it to order, and they need some time to do that. Depends on the time of year and how long that takes. Usually it's no more than 7 days. A lot of times they can do it within 1 to 3 days, but it really depends on how things are looking that time of year. So if it's not in stock, I'd give myself an extra 1 to 2 weeks for it to leave the factory, then give myself another 5 to 7 days for it to arrive to me. So that does require some planning because these do have to be installed first before you can do your shelving, before you can do your equipment, before you can do your bulkhead. So make sure that you get that order in for your liners earlier than you think you're gonna need it, because if it's not in stock, it does have to be cut to order. If it is in stock, it'll ship within 24 hours, but once the LTL Freight carriers have it, it can vary widely on timing. So just take that into consideration when you're placing your order. So I hope this video has been helpful to you. If you are looking for Legend liners for your cargo van, make sure you check us out at upfitsupply.com. Legend just gave us an award actually for Online Retailer of the Year. So we're a trusted source for all your Legend needs. You can call us, chat us, text us. We're gonna know everything there is to know about these liners. In case there's a question you still have after watching this video, be sure to reach out. Again, my name is Ryan. Have a good one.